Gospel as recorded by Matthew. It reads, "For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them." I want to talk to you for a few minutes about learning how to deal with life the way that it is. Learning how to deal with life the way that it is. Before the age of cable television and 24-hour news networks, most of us would watch one of the evening news broadcasts in order to be kept abreast of current events. CBS Evening News was anchored by a man named Walter Cronkite. And whenever Mr. Cronkite ended his newscast, he would simply say, "And that's the way it is." After having reported on the news events of the day, he would summarize what his viewers had experienced by saying, in effect, "This is the reality. It may not be what you wanted it to be. It may not be what I wanted it to be. But that's the way it is." And we are always better off dealing with things as they are than we would be not knowing. One of the distinctions we make in the church, as well as in other aspects of life, is the distinction between what is and what ought to be. One speaks to the ideal, the other speaks to the real. But the truth of life is that it is seldom what it ought to be. Life is filled with ups and downs. Life is filled with complexities and with shortcomings. Thus, we must learn how to live our lives within the context of what is. Many erroneously suppose that Christianity is only concerned with what ought to be. But while Christianity seeks to challenge us to move toward the ideal, it is very much concerned with the real. The teachings of Jesus are not about what ought to be, but about what is. Consider the Great Commission as reported by Mark. Jesus tells us, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, and whoever does not believe will be condemned." Now, there's nothing ideal about that. That's just the way it is. Consider what Jesus says about the good life. He taught in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." That's not a statement describing an ideal. It's a statement of reality. Some people hunger and thirst after everything but righteousness, and they are never satisfied. That's right. The more they get, the more they want. The more they do, the more they want to do. And they can't understand how someone else can have so much less than they have, and do so much less than they do, and still be happy. They don't realize that what Jesus said is not the ideal. It's just the way that it is. We celebrate today, on this Recognition Sunday, these people who have decided out of the goodness of their hearts to devote their time and their talent and their energy to helping children without any compensation for what they are doing. Not because it's the way it ought to be, but because it's the way that it is. And a lot of people today are having problems because they just can't accept life the way that it is.
Right.
Always finding fault. Always complaining. Always making excuses. I would have done better, but
What?
would have finished school on time, but would have stayed out of trouble, but a lot of us are experts on what ought to be, but we don't know how to deal with life the way that it is. Just like this is true with things in the world, it's also true in the church and with spiritual matters. A lot of us are falling short of our potential in the church and our personal walk with Christ because we're looking for what ought to be rather than dealing with what is. We won't come to Bible study. We won't find a place of service in the church. We shirk on our responsibility to give to the Lord as the Lord has given to us. All because we're waiting for the ideal and we don't want to deal with what is. Well, there's no denying that everything is not as it should be. But the only way that we can help make life what it ought to be is to start dealing with what it is. Everything may not be as it ought to be in your home. You may know every fault that your spouse has. Your children may be giving you grief. You may be disgusted and at the point of giving up. But you ain't going to make your home better by dreaming about what ought to be. You have to dig in and deal with things the way that they are. And church member, you may know every shortcoming of this church. You may have a list of all that we ought to be doing that we're not doing. But you're not going to help us get better with shade tree meetings and gripe sessions. You're not going to help us get better by taking a hands-off attitude until everybody sees things your way. But you can help make things better if you stop waiting for the idea and start dealing with things the way that they are. Our text today is a parable of Jesus that has special implications that grow out of dealing with life the way that it is. Jesus tells us about a rich man who entrusted a considerable sum of money into the hands of 3 servants. One man received 5 talents, one 2 talents, and one 1 talent. The 5-talent man and the 2-talent man invested the money wisely and doubled the value of what their master had given them. But the 1-talent man did nothing with what he was given. Now, some things are obvious from the outset. If this 1-talent man had had any desire to deal with things the way that they were, he could have just followed the example of the 5-talent man and the 2-talent man. See, we don't have to be as gifted or as smart as another person. Sometimes all it takes is the intelligence to follow a good example that's laid out before us. This 1-talent man could have asked the others for their counsel and advice. And church, when we find ourselves in a situation where we don't know what to do, it's not wrong to ask somebody who does know what they are doing. It's not a sign of weakness to seek the counsel of someone with greater knowledge and experience. One reason why we have difficulty in life is because we won't even do the smallest of things that we could do to help ourselves. Instead of getting help from others, the 1-talent man went out and hid what he had received. And the master returned and received the report of his servant's stewardship. He praised the first 2 and added to what they had. He became very disturbed with the 3rd man and took from him what he had. And it's at this point that the words of our text are given. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. And whoever does not have even what they have taken from them. Somebody sitting there saying that ain't fact. But like it or not, the parable ain't talking about what's fact. The parable is talking about the way that it is. The parable reminds us that Christians must accept the consequences of their own behavior. I want you to look at the similarities and the differences in life made apparent by this parable of Jesus. When you look at the similarities, the first thing we have to acknowledge is that all three of these men had a chance to succeed. They did not all have an equal amount, but they did all have an equal chance to succeed. The master gave something to everybody. And when we learn how to use the something that we have, rather than complain about what we think we ought to have, then we have a chance to succeed. Now, church in life, that's the way it is. God doesn't give everybody the same thing. Doesn't give everybody the same amount. But no one can deny that God has given each of us something. Instead of crying about what we don't have, we do better to learn how to use what we do have. I'm not concerned with what God gave to anybody else. I'm trying to learn how to use what God has given to me. And I know that if I learn how to use what He has given me for His glory and His honor, then I can achieve success in life. Some of us are not using what the Lord has given to us because we're upset about what He gave to somebody else. There are some things that we don't need to focus on. I don't need to focus on why God didn't give me what He gave you. I just need to learn how to use what God has given me. And I know that He's given all of us a chance. Then more than giving them all a chance, the Master gave the same requirement to all three. Do the best that you can with what you have been given. I don't think the Master expected the 2-talent man to produce what the 5-talent man produced. I don't think He expected the 1-talent man to produce what the 2-talent man produced. But He did expect that the 1-talent man would do the best that he could with what he had been given. Church, you need to hear this today. The 5-talent man could have failed. The 2-talent man could have failed. The success doesn't depend on what you got. Success depends on what you do with what you have got. Some of the biggest failures in life come from people who have been given tremendous chances. Some of you young people fall into that category. You've been given a wonderful start in life. You've been afforded opportunities that many of your peers do not have. But you need to know today, it's not in what you have. It's in what you do with what you have that will make a difference in your life. You're smart, but smart people fail in life if they're not careful. Some of you are good looking folk, beautiful and handsome, but beautiful people fail if they're not careful. God has blessed us with what it takes to succeed, but blessing us with what it takes does not guarantee our success. You've got to learn how to use it to His glory. God will not judge you by what He gave other folks. But God will judge you by whether or not you did the best that you could with what He gave you. That's the requirement. When I've done all that I can do, and I've gone as far as I can go, and I've done all that the Lord has given me the ability to do, that's all there is. And it may not be good enough in somebody else's eyes, but it'll be good enough in the sight of God. These men shared certain similarities. They were all given a chance. They were all given the same requirement. But as I close today, I want you to know that it was in how each of these men responded to their similarities that we see the major difference. See, in the end, 2 of these men did their best and were commended. One wasted his opportunity and had to face the consequences of his failure. Church, one of the saddest things that can happen in life is to waste our opportunity and then have to face the consequences of our failure. When we waste God's talent, when we waste his time, when we waste his opportunities, when we waste his intelligence, when we waste his good looks, when we waste his health and strength, when we waste the gifts that he has so freely bestowed upon us, then we have to deal with the consequences of our failure. Oh, you're going to blame it on somebody else. That's what we're good at doing. You can blame your failure on your family. You can blame it on your conditions. You can get hostile and frustrated. You can blame the failure on God. You can blame it on the church. You can blame it on the preacher. But it's not our failure. It's your failure. You haven't done the best that you can with what the Lord gave you. Nobody's at his best all the time. But all of us ought to be trying to do what's better day by day. And the one thing that God is asking of you, what did you do with what I have given you? Don't get hung up in what ought to be. Learn how to deal with the way that it is. And then you can do your best and not waste your opportunity. Because it ain't the church that you're going to have to answer to. It ain't your neighbor you're going to have to answer to. One day, you're going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And he's going to ask you, what did you do with what I gave you? The doors of God's church are open. There might be someone here today who needs to make the most of what the Lord has given to them. And I want you to know, making the most starts with putting your life in the Lord's hands. You can't do it by yourself. But the Word tells us that we have a helper along this journey called life. Behold, I stand before